Chapter 1. The Shattered Host. Ash fell like snow upon the dead. The plains of Groustad, once a field of emerald grass and sloping hills, had been churned into a mire of gore and charred flesh. Broken standards, tattered and scorched, fluttered weakly in the wind, their once proud sigils now obscured by blood and soot. The sky hung low, a ceiling of gray smothered with a stink of burning pitch, horseflesh, and ruptured entrails. In the midst of this ruin, amidst a mound of mangled corpses and rusting iron, something moved. A gauntleted hand, blackened and steaming, punched through a pile of dead men. Bones snapped beneath it. With a guttural snarl, a monstrous figure dragged itself free from the carnage. Armor scorched and pitted, helm split down one side. Varkhul the Blackened rose, like a revenant born from the womb of battle itself. His breath came in harsh, wheezing gasps inside the remains of his war mask. The left side of his cuirass had been torn away, revealing flesh beneath, pale and pocked with bruises, the skin etched with crude scars and half-healed burns. A jagged spearhead jutted from his thigh. Blood poured down his leg in a slow, thick ribbon, dark and syrupy. He gripped the haft of the spear, snarling. The flesh screamed as he ripped it free. His own voice joined it, a howl not of pain but fury, a broken symphony of rage and defiance that echoed across the desolation. The battle had ended, that much was clear. Around him were the shattered remnants of his warband, iron-clad marauders, beastmen with flensed hides, chaos warriors impaled on halberds. The black banners of the dark gods lay crumpled in the filth, trampled by horses and men alike. Varkhul recognized the twisted helm of Dragon Skulltongue, face caved in by a warhammer, the gory pulp beneath, unrecognizable. Acolytes of Tzeentch, their robes ablaze, huddled together in a final gesture of warding, burned alive in a blue fire that had outlasted them. And then there were the bodies of the foe. Imperial soldiers, Reichsguard militia, free companies, their corpses lay strewn in concentric rings, as if death itself had spiraled outward from the point where Varkhul now stood. Some had been decapitated, others cleaved in half. One man, still twitching faintly, had his intestines wound around his throat like a noose. He killed that one first. Varkhul limped to him, raised a heavy iron boot, and crushed the man's skull with a sickening crunch. Bones splintered. Brain matter and blood spattered his greaves. He didn't even look down. His warblade, Akrakar, the maw of ruin, was buried in the chest of a slain Empire champion. The blade's black metal pulsed faintly, thirsty. Varkhul pried it loose, and the corpse exhaled its last breath in a wet rattle. The sword sang in his grip, whispering dark promises in a tongue no man born in this world should know. "Silence," Varkhul growled, his voice gravel-thick. He surveyed the battlefield again. There would be no reinforcements, no rescue, no gods. They had abandoned him. The realization crept in not as panic, but a deeper kind of dread, a cold certainty that gripped his soul like a frostwhite's talons. The dark gods had turned their gaze elsewhere. The invasion was a failure. The glorious storm they had summoned was scattered like dust in the wind. He was nothing now, no longer a chosen, no longer a warlord. Just a man in the wrong land, surrounded by the corpses of those who had dared dream of conquest. A crow landed nearby, cawed once, then began tearing a strip of flesh from the cheek of a fallen marauder. Another landed beside it, then a third. A feast of the dead had begun. Varkhul watched them for a moment, then raised his blade and charged them in a burst of fury, bellowing a challenge. The birds scattered into the air, their wings flapping like the cracking of wet sails. He dropped to one knee, panting, the exertion dragging fire through his damaged muscles. The wound in his leg wept anew, but it was good, Pain reminded him that he still breathed. He remained there for a long time, unmoving. When at last he rose again, it was with resolve. He would not die here. He would not be left to rot like carrion under a gray sky. The South had rejected him, fine. Then he would return north and remind the gods why they had chosen him in the first place. He tore a ragged strip from a dead Reiksguard's cloak and bound his leg. Every step forward was agony, but agony was familiar. It sharpened him, strengthened him. With the wind at his back and the taste of ash on his tongue, Varkhul the Blackened limped northward through the remains of his shattered host, the lone survivor of a slaughtered dream, and the only echo of the storm that had come. Chapter 2. Enemy Land. The Reichland stretched before him like the throat of a beast, gaping and ripe for devouring. But Varkhul the Blackened was no longer a hunter, he was prey. For 3 days he moved like a shadow through the dying woods that bordered the blood-drenched plains. His corrupted armor, blackened and spiked, now marked him more clearly than any banner. Stripping it was not an option. Without its cursed weight, his body would fail. It had become a second skin, fused by ritual and pain. Even now it pulsed faintly with the warp taint of the north. A quiet hum of demonic hate, buried in the rivets and joints. Each step forward was a trial. His thigh wound festered, slick with infection. Crows still trailed him, circling far above, as if waiting for their carrion prize to finally collapse. But Varkhul endured. The Reichland forests were thick with green, the kind untouched by chaos fire. The scent of pine and moss hung heavy, unnatural to his senses. In the north, trees were twisted, gnarled by frost and warp storms. These were vibrant, pulsing with dull, defiant life. He hated them. There is not one of them. He moved by moonlight and fog when the woods grew silent and the owl calls echoed like dirges. He avoided the roads, though more than once he glimpsed the warm flicker of lanterns between trees. Empire patrols, peasants, or perhaps hunters. He didn't care to know. He skirted wide, always moving northward, limping deeper into the heart of hostile land. On the 5th night, he stumbled upon a village. It was small, hemmed in by wooden palisades, the stink of livestock thick in the night air. Firelight leaked from the windows of squat thatched houses. He crouched low atop a hill, watching from the tree line, a black shape against the darker sky. He could hear laughter, dogs barking, the clatter of tankards. Life. Something ancient and venomous twisted in his gut. His warband would have razed this place in minutes. The men flayed, the women taken, the children broken upon iron altars to the gods. He could almost hear the battle cries of his fallen brothers, smell the iron tang of blood on snow. But they were gone, and he was alone, a godless husk, watching warmth he would never taste again. He turned away. As he moved along the edge of the woods, he caught the scent. Iron and sweat. Instinct screamed. He spun. A Reichland scout stood no more than 10 paces from him, partially obscured by a tree, crossbow raised. His eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. Blackened armor, the rune-carved pauldron, the wicked serrated blades strapped to the stranger's back. "Chaos!" he gasped, fumbling the trigger. Varkhul was faster. He surged forward with a guttural roar, blades singing from its scabbard in a shriek of tortured steel. The crossbow loosed wide, thudding uselessly into a tree. Varkhul's blade met bone. The scout's scream was cut short as Akrakar bit through his collarbone and shoulder, cleaving him nearly in two. Blood geysered, arterial and hot, spraying the trees. Varkhul yanked the blade free and caught the man as he fell, dragging him into the underbrush, smothering his final gurgles beneath a gauntleted fist. He crouched in the dirt, breathing heavily, staring at the lifeless body. Too close. The Empire was tightening its net. He took the scout's cloak, pulling it around his armored form, the oversized fabric struggling to hide the jagged bulk of his mail. It was a poor disguise, but it might fool a peasant from afar. He moved on. For days more he stalked deeper through the Rakeland hinterlands. He saw signs of his enemies everywhere, burned chaos shrines, executed cultists dangling from trees, the carcasses of beastmen strung up as warnings. In one clearing he found the bodies of 3 of his own, 2 men and a woman, nailed to a barn wall, their eyes pecked out and sigils carved into their flesh. Below them, the words "Sigmar's light purges darkness" were scrawled in blood. He did not mourn them. He only looted what he could. One had a half-filled water skin, another a pouch of rusted nails and dried meat. It would have to do. One night, rain came in sheets, washing the mud from his boots and the blood from his blade. Thunder cracked overhead as if the gods themselves mocked him. He took shelter beneath a collapsed hunting blind, curling into the earth, sword clutched close, fever gnawing at his mind. He dreamed of fire and ice, of howling war bands and screaming daemons. He saw himself crowned in black iron, a mountain of skulls at his feet, and when he awoke, alone and soaked in his own sweat, he whispered to the dark, "I will return." With aching limbs and burning hatred, Varkhul the Blackened pressed forward, alone, hunted, and unbroken. North lay home. North lay vengeance. Chapter 3. The Witch Hunter's Trail. The fire had long since died, but its embers still whispered of blood. Gerwin Falk stood in the center of the ruined barn, trench coat heavy with rain, wide-brimmed hat dripping water onto the ash-cake floorboards. His gloved hand hovered over the hilt of the flintlock at his hip. The stink of chaos hung thick in the air, sulfur, scorched meat, and the cold iron scent of desecration. 3 corpses lay slumped near the altar, throat to gut split wide open like gutted pigs, organs spilled into neat piles. Their eyes were burned out, sockets crusted with black ichor, and symbols of the dark gods were carved into their torsos in trembling reverent strokes. A local cult butchered, not by soldiers, not by Sigmarites, by something far worse. Falk knelt, frowning. Bootprints. Large. Deep. Whoever had walked here wore heavy armor. Unnatural armor. He ran his fingers along the grooves in the blood-caked wood. Chaos steel. The hunter rose, eyes hard beneath his hat brim. "He's close," he murmured. A voice behind him spoke, nervous and trembling. "My lord witch hunter, the townsfolk say a black knight was seen near the timberline. Huge, they said, like a statue of iron come alive." Falk turned. The militiaman shrank beneath his gaze. "Good," Falk said, eyes gleaming. "Sound the horns. Mobilize what men we can muster. There is a servant of the ruinous powers on our soil, and he will not leave it." The dogs found the second site. A clearing deep in the woods, littered with the corpses of patrolmen, guts splayed in steaming ribbons, limbs broken at impossible angles. One man had been split down the middle, ribs yawning open like a butchered stag. Another had his own sword rammed through his skull, exiting clean through the back of his neck. The trees were streaked with blood, some painted with runes that twisted and writhed when stared at too long. Falk crouched beside the body of the sergeant. His hand rested on a torn page of parchment, clutched in the corpse's fist. A prayer to Sigmar, useless, clearly. He stood, jaw clenched. Still bleeding. This was hours ago. They were chasing a demon in flesh. Varkhul moved through the forest like a wounded bear, massive, brutal, and inexorably forward. The cloak he'd stolen was soaked and useless, barely clinging to the jagged plates of his corrupted armor. The wound in his leg throbbed with fever. He had slept little, eaten less. Yet his grip on Akrakar remained steady. He had seen them, the torches in the night, the flicker of flintlocks and halberds among the trees. They came in numbers now, organized, not the blundering peasant patrols of days past. This was a hunt. He could feel it in the air, taste it in the way the woods fell silent at night, how the crows no longer circled above him, how every creak of branch might be the breath of a hunter drawing near. He needed blood. He found it in a hamlet, nestled in the folds of a fog-slicked valley. 10 buildings, a smithy, and a chapel to Sigmar. He came under cover of dusk. The smith died first, throat crushed in Varkhul's gauntleted fist. A guard rushed him and was split from shoulder to hip in a single arc of Akrakar. The rest screamed, fled, doors slammed, but he did not stop. He burned the chapel with 2 screaming villagers inside, then carved a burning path through the rest. By the time the first soldiers arrived, there was nothing left but smoke and the soft crackle of corpses still alight. Falk stood at the edge of the blackened village, smoke curling around him. The witch hunter's lips were pressed into a grim line. Men behind him whispered prayers, their faces pale. The heads of children were lined along a fence, lips sewn shut with sinew. "He's not just running," Falk said, softly. "He's mocking us." Sergeant stepped forward, swallowing hard. What manner of man does this, sir?" Falk didn't answer. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a worn, leather-bound tome, a holy writ of purification, bound with silver and bone. He handed it to the sergeant. "Because he is no man." 3 days passed. Each brought new horror. Another village burned. Another patrol found butchered in ritualistic slaughter. Varkhul moved like a phantom, always ahead, always vanishing into the mist. The trail twisted through hills and swamps, marked by death and desecration. Gerwin Falk followed, relentless, sleepless, a hunter bound by wrath and faith. At night he knelt by the fire, drawing wards in the dirt, murmuring prayers that burned his tongue. He cleansed his bullets with incense and etched silver runes into his blade. He painted his hands with ashes of the dead. He whispered oaths to Sigmar, not for mercy but vengeance. He would bring this demon knight down, even if he had to chase him to the gates of hell, even if it meant becoming something less than human. Because Varkhul the Blackened had made one mistake. He had left a trail. Chapter 4. Scars of Sigmar. The village was already dead when Varkhul arrived. He crested the ridge just past midnight, shadows thick beneath the pale gaze of mansleep. The wind carried no bird song, only the distant thump of drums, low, guttural beats like a war march muffled by earth. Beneath it came chanting, rhythmic and laced with agony. He descended into the vale slowly, every footstep silent, despite the weight of his armored bulk. Trees gave way to the ruins of old timber homes, their thatched roofs collapsed or burning low in their hearths. The streets were lined with sigils of Sigmar, but they were twisted, daubed in blood, inverted, defaced, with nails and bone. The smell hit him first, rot, copper, incense, and something fouler still. It clung to his tongue like bile. He moved forward. From behind a gutted stable came the chant again, louder now, a chorus of rasping voices. Pain is purity, flesh is devotion, blood is the river to salvation. He stepped around the stable and froze. They were gathered in the square. A dozen men and women, naked but for scraps of sackcloth and tattered banners of the twin-tailed comet, knelt in a perfect circle around a crude altar of shattered Sigmarite stone. Each had their eyes sewn shut, their mouths bled from torn corners, their chests covered in lashes both fresh and scarred over. They struck themselves with barbed flails, backs flayed raw, strips of skin hanging like red ribbons. One man beat his face into the cobblestones, teeth scattering like pebbles. Another plunged his hand into coals, screaming praises as the flesh blistered and split. Atop the altar stood a figure in priest's robes, filthy and stiff with blood. His arms were flayed to the bone, tendons exposed like strings from a ruptured puppet. He raised a rusted warhammer above his head, shrieking with fervor. "Sigmar's flame burns impunity. Let our flesh fuel his light." Then he brought the hammer down, onto his own leg. Bulls snapped, white jutting through flesh. The crowd roared their approval, voices cracked and elated, lost to madness. Varkhul watched, unmoving. This was no devotion. This was parody. He stepped into the square. The priest turned to him, mouth agape. "A vision! A scourge of our sins! Sigmar sends the blade of cleansing! Behold!" He prostrated himself before Varkhul, blood leaking from his ruined limb. "Strike us down, Daemon Knight! Strike us down and let pain sanctify the soul." Varkhul said nothing. Akrakah slid from its sheath with a hiss like a serpent's breath. Its runes flared dimly, hungry. The nearest flagellant lunged at him, flails swinging wildly. The iron barbs struck his shoulder with a wet thud but did nothing. Varkhul turned and with a single sweep cleaved the man in half. His body folded open like meat split for market. Screams followed, but not of fear, of joy. Another rushed him. Varkhul caught her by the throat, lifted her from the ground, and crushed her windpipe in his gauntlet. Her body spasmed and hung limp. They kept coming. 3, 5, 7, he danced the butcher's ballet, each strike ending lives in geysers of arterial spray. Heads rolled, guts spilled. One flagellant tried to kiss his blade as it entered her chest. She died smiling. It enraged him. "You know nothing of chaos," Varkhul growled. "You crawl in filth and call it worship." The priest staggered to his feet, tears and blood streaming from his sewn eyes. "Our suffering is holy. We—" Varkhul drove Akrakar through his mouth, silencing the madness. The body twitched once, then fell limp, dragging the impaled warhammer with it to the stones. The square fell silent. Only one remained, a boy, no older than 15, cowering beneath a shattered cart. His back was lashed raw, but his eyes were not sewn, his hands not bloodied. Varkhul stared at him. "Run." The boy didn't move. Varkhul turned and walked away, the corpses steaming in the chill night behind him. He left the village burning, a warning written in fire. Not all who preach purity serve order, and not all who bear the mark of chaos are blind. Chapter 5. Chains of the Past. The wind in the north never whispered, it screamed. Even now, under the canopy of southern trees and veils of foreign birdsong, Varkhul could feel it at the back of his skull, the bitter breath of home, cold, harsh, unforgiving. He sat beneath a twisted elm, leg wrapped in bloodied cloth, fireless and still. The forest around him pulsed with distant life, but he did not move. The night was quiet, but his mind was not. He was back in the snow. The dream came like rot through flesh, slow at first, then all-consuming. The irons had burned for hours. He remembered the hiss of flesh, the stink of his own skin melting beneath the brands. His wrists had bled raw in their shackles, his back a canvas of whip welts and frostbite. He was 13 when the Reavers took him, no taller than a blade, but fierce, wild-eyed, full of curses. That was why they broke him so hard. They made him crawl for scraps, fight other children with stones and broken teeth. His captor, a hulking Vanir named Score, would tie meat to his neck and loose the dogs. "You run," he'd say, "or you feed." The cold became his second skin, starvation his closest companion. The dreams came even then. Dark voices in the frost, whispers in the wind that called him northward, past the chains, past the mountains, past the gods he had been told to fear. On the night of the Black Sun, Varkhul killed Score with a rusted chisel. The blade barely pierced the throat, but he drove it deeper, again and again, until he felt the warm spray across his face. The dogs did not chase him this time. They watched as he fled barefoot into the blizzard, howling madly into the storm. He found the altar 2 days later, a monolith of black stone, buried beneath drifts of ice and time. Runes crawled along its surface like worms under flesh, whispering. He knelt before it, and the gods answered. He rose from the snow no longer a boy. He returned to the camp at dawn. Naked, covered in runes carved into his own chest with sharpened bone, eyes hollow with madness. The warriors laughed at first. Then they screamed. The first to fall had his arms torn from their sockets. His blood sprayed in twin arcs across the fire. Another had his skull crushed with a cooking stone. Varkhul fought like a wraith, silent, relentless, without pain or fear. He didn't stop until the snow was red and the screams had faded to whimpers. From that day on, they called him Blackened, not just for the ash-streaked burns he bore from his chains, but for the hollowness inside him, the place where mercy had been carved out and replaced with war. He blinked in the present, the scent of pine mixing with phantom blood. The fireless dark pressed in around him, but he saw only the past. His warband, the iron howl, faces passed like ghosts through the trees. Kaeldric, his second, a giant who wore 3 wolf pelts and drank blood like wine, dead now, torn in half by Empire cannons. Ulsa the Pale, who bound daemons into her own flesh and sang lullabies to the fire. Her screams had been the loudest when the Reiksguard set her alight. Brugg and Falnon, twins who spoke in one voice and fought with hooked chains. Lost in the river, armor dragging them under as the bridges burned. He saw their deaths every time he closed his eyes. He had led them here, southward, with promises of conquest, of glory, of favor. But the gods had turned their faces away, and now only he remained. His hands trembled, not with weakness, but with restraint. The weight of what he had lost crushed the air from his lungs. He should have died with them, he knew that. But something else had gripped him that day on the field. Not cowardice, not survival, defiance. Even in the face of divine abandonment, he would not kneel, he would not be their discarded tool. He would carve his own return, one corpse at a time. Varkhul rose, the memory fading into the hiss of wind in the leaves. He slung Akrakar across his back and stepped back into the trees. There were more ghosts ahead, and he would not be the only one haunted. Chapter 6. Crossroads of the Dead. The sky bled rust over the valley. Varkhul stood atop a withered rise, black armor caked in mud and dried gore, peering down upon the cursed field below. Once it had been a battlefield. Now it was a wound in the earth, festering and alive. Spears jutted from the ground like rotting teeth. Banners hung in tatters from rusted poles. Bones littered the soil in vast, tangled mounds, half buried in mud, crusted in moss and decay. Crows circled above but never landed. Even they knew this place was wrong. He felt it the moment his boot touched the plain. A pulling, a sucking, as if the earth itself wanted to drag him under. The The wind whispered in a dozen voices, each one pleading, each one accusing. He walked on. A storm loomed overhead, churning black and green, the air thick with the stench of old blood and sorcery. Thunder cracked, but no rain fell. The clouds only watched. Halfway through the field, the dead stirred. It began as a shiver in the soil. Then a hand broke the surface, skeletal, clutching a rusted axe. Then another, and another. All around him corpses clawed their way free from the grave, knights in shattered mail, pikemen with skulls split by maces, peasants still clutching rusted farming tools. Their eyes glowed with sickly blue fire. Varkhul unsheathed Akrakar, the blade hissing in the heavy air like a predator scenting prey. The dead came in waves. The first reached him with a broken spear. Varkhul parried, spun, and took its head clean off. Bone shattered like pottery. Another lunged, teeth bared, and he rammed his gauntleted fist through its ribcage, then ripped free its spine with a wet crack. More followed, relentless, mindless. A tide of forgotten warriors, driven by some unseen will. He fought like a man possessed. Slash, rip, crush. A Kriegsmesser-wielding corpse charged. He caught its blade on his pauldron, then drove Akrak up through its jaw, splitting its skull like a melon. Guts and dirt sprayed his visor. Another tried to bite his leg. He stamped down, crushing its skull into mud with a meaty crunch. But for every one he felled, 3 more took its place. He was being dragged down, swarmed. Clawed hands gripped his limbs, pulling at him, trying to bury him in the grave they had risen from. A scream ripped through the air, high, sharp, laced with arcane power. Suddenly, the undead froze. A pulse of violet light erupted across the field, and the corpses trembled, then slumped. From the far end of the battlefield came a figure robed in black and crimson, his staff crowned with a goat's skull wreathed in green flame. "Impressive," the necromancer said, voice echoing unnaturally. "You fight well for a beast of chaos." Varkhul snarled. "Speak, corpse herder, or be the next to fall." The necromancer bowed mockingly. "Call me Malderic. This land was mine once. These corpses, my soldiers. But another, a priest of Mor, desecrated my work. He sowed this field with curses and spite. I need help cleansing it." Varkhul narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want from me?" "Your strength, just for tonight," Malderic grinned, revealing blackened teeth. "Help me reclaim what is mine, and I'll open a path north, away through the Empire, unseen, untouched. A lie, but one Varkhul could use." "Do it," he growled. Together they marched through the night, purging cursed spirits, battling wights armored in memories of glory. Malderic chanted vile rites, raising flames of death from the air, casting down specters with waves of necrotic energy. Varkhul tore through revenants with blade and fist, a whirlwind of destruction, his armor slick with ichor and phantasmal blood. By dawn, the field was quiet. Malderic stood over a mass grave, breathing heavily. "It is done." Varkhul stepped forward, blade lowered. "Then fulfill your promise." But Malderic laughed. "Oh, poor knight. You really believed I'd let a chaos wretch walk free with my secrets?" He raised his staff, now pulsing with power stolen from the slain. "Your soul will make a fine phylactery." He struck. A bolt of necrotic energy hit Varkhul square in the chest, throwing him back into a mound of bones. The world spun. Pain bloomed behind his eyes. The necromancer advanced, sneering. I screaming, "Butcher!" But Varkhul rose. Steam hissed from his armor where the bolt struck. Akrakar pulsed with rage. He bared his teeth behind his broken helm. "No. You die knowing your magic means nothing." He charged. Malderic's second spell was faster, but Varkhul was already inside his guard. He batted the staff aside and drove his sword through the necromancer's gut. Malderic gasped, eyes wide, mouth flooding with black blood. Varkhul lifted him from the ground on the blade, then twisted. Malderic's scream echoed through the entire field. When it ended, he was a twitching carcass, impaled on the altar he'd once ruled from. Varkhul yanked Akrakar free, spat blood onto the cursed soil, and turned away. The dead lay still now, unbound and unled. The battlefield was quiet. Another false prophet slain, another lie crushed beneath his heel, and the path north opened once more, with no help but his own. Chapter 7. Blood in the Pines. The trees loomed like titans, their limbs creaking in the wind, dripping mist and pine sap. Sunlight barely pierced the canopy, casting the world into shifting shadow. Here, in the heart of the Waldhain forest, the land swallowed sound, and the silence was thick enough to smother a scream. Varkhul moved like a spectre, every muscle taut beneath his blackened plate. The wound on his side, gift of a necromancer's dying curse, throbbed with each breath, leaking black ichor and crusted blood. He left faint trails behind him, but he didn't care. They already knew he was here. Rakesguard. He had seen them from the ridge that morning, gleaming silver plate, crimson cloaks, and the black lion of Altdorf on their shields. 15 strong, mounted, armed with lances, long swords, and firelocks. Purifiers, hunters, elite sons of the Empire. The hammer made flesh. He'd slaughtered enough of their brothers to earn this personal attention. He crept through a thicket, the scent of pine thick in his nose. Birds had gone silent. No insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They were close. The first came from the trees. A spear lanced toward his throat from the branches above. Varkhul twisted, the tip grazing his helm. He caught the haft mid-thrust, yanked the attacker from his perch, and drove him headfirst into a tree trunk. The Rakesguard's skull cracked like a melon. His body went limp. Shouts erupted all around. Steel on steel. Bark splitting. Hooves pounding the forest floor. They came from all directions, coordinated, relentless. Muskets roared, smoke coiling through the branches. Lead balls hissed past his head, one striking his pauldron and spinning him to the side. He slammed behind a fallen log, breath ragged. Another musket shot cracked through the wood beside his head. No time. He surged up, a cracker flashing, and charged into the heart of the onslaught. The Reichsguard raised his sword, but Varkhul was already inside his guard. The Chaos Knight's blade sheared through the man's ribs, armor shrieking, blood fountaining across the pine needles. Another knight swung from horseback, cleaving at Varkhul's head. He ducked, seized the reins, and yanked the man from the saddle. The knight screamed as Varkhul slammed him against a boulder, once, twice, until his helm split and his face became pulp. Screams filled the woods. One Rakesguard lunged with a pike. Varkhul caught the shaft under his arm, snapped it with a twist of his wrist, and drove the jagged end into the soldier's throat. Blood jutted across his visor, warm and thick. But they were good, coordinated. A sword caught his leg, a deep slash. He roared in pain, staggered. A hammer slammed into his back, nearly knocking him to his knees. He turned, grabbed the wielder by the throat, and crushed the life from him in a single brutal squeeze. His gauntlet came away slick with red foam and splintered bone. Then came the captain. Tall, broad, helm-crested in gold. He came at Varkhul with righteous fury and flawless form. His long sword struck like lightning, precise and punishing. He feinted high, then slashed across Varkhul's ribs, opening a fresh wound. Varkhul snarled and swung wide, but the captain stepped back, out of reach. "You're finished, beast," the captain hissed. "In Sigmar's name I cleanse you." He charged. Varkhul met him, sword to sword, fury to faith. Blades rang like bells in the pine-choked air. Sparks burst with every clash. The captain moved with holy purpose, each strike a prayer. Varkhul moved with hatred, each blow a curse. The dance ended when Varkhul took the full brunt of a blow to his helm, then caught the captain's wrist mid-strike and head-butted him with such force the helm caved inward. The knight stumbled, dazed, and Varkhul drove Akrakar into his gut. The Reiksguard captain dropped to his knees, blood pouring from his mouth. Varkhul leaned in. "Your god isn't watching." Then he tore the blade upward, splitting the man open from belly to breastbone. The forest fell deathly quiet. 8 corpses lay at his feet. The others, wounded, scattered, fled into the trees. Varkhul stood in the ruin, blood dripping from his armor, sword trembling in his grip. His wounds burned, his breath was fire. But he was alive. He staggered from the clearing, leaving behind a massacre. The pines drank deeply that day, their roots soaking in the blood of Sigmar's finest. And Varkhul the Blackened walked on, more ghost than man, more wrath than flesh. Chapter 8. The Demon Within. Night came, with no moon. The wind had died, and the forest lay still around the wounded Chaos Knight. Varkhul knelt in a hollow between 2 massive stones, surrounded by the carcasses of the Reiksguard he had slain earlier. Their blood had dried on his armor, like a second skin, crusting over the runes, etched deep into the black metal. Akrakar, his sword, lay across his knees, silent now, but not for long. His breath came ragged. The wounds he bore would have killed a lesser man thrice over. Gashes tore across his ribs and thigh. His chest plate had been split nearly in 2. His left hand refused to unclench from the blade's hilt, fingers locked in a death grip of spasming nerves. He felt it then, the pulse, like a second heartbeat, but not his own. A rhythm deeper, darker, from within the armor itself. A low hum at first, barely a whisper, on the edge of thought. "Gibbend?" The voice slithered through his skull like smoke, genderless, ageless. It echoed not with words, but with hunger. "You are dying. Let us help. You need not suffer this alone. The flesh is weak. Let us shape you anew." His left pauldron glowed faintly, the rune of the dark gods, writhing as if carved into flesh, not iron. Faces bubbled to the surface of the plate, wailing, pleading, laughing. Varkhul snarled and punched his armored fist into the stone beside him. Bone cracked. The pain kept him grounded, but the voice was relentless. Akrakars began to stir. The blade trembled, its runes flaring with molten red light. It hissed softly, like breath across hot coals. "You have already fed us. So many souls, so much blood. Why stop now? Accept your place and ascend." He could see it, the offer laid bare in his mind's eye. Strength unimaginable, flesh reforged into brass and shadow, wings, claws, a form befitting a true servant of the gods. He would never bleed again, never fall. Empires would bow, realms would burn. All it would take was surrender. No, the word came low and ragged, a growl choked by blood. The forest seemed to shudder. "You are nothing without us." "I am the blade," Varkhul growled, rising unsteadily. "Not the hand that swings it." The armor convulsed against his skin. Spikes lengthened, chains writhed. A black ichor seeped from the joints, boiling as it touched the air. back, a Kerrang shrieked in his grip, a deafening cry like a tortured soul torn from its flesh. Then came the vision, a battlefield, endless. He stood at the head of a legion of horned monstrosities, rivers of blood flowing beneath his feet. His body was colossal, his face a hollow helm of flame. He looked upon the world as a god of ruin, and all bent before him. And yet he was a puppet. Strings bound him to the heavens, pulled by unseen forces. A slave in a crown of bone. The vision cracked. "No," he whispered, and flame erupted from his armor. He thrust Akrakar into the earth. The blade screamed again, but he held it, forced it downward. "You are my tool," he hissed through clenched teeth, "not my master." The earth around him blackened. The whispers became howls, incoherent and furious. He gripped the sword tighter, willing it into silence. His body shook. Blood spilled from his mouth. And then the voice faltered. The whispers receded. The glow dimmed. The armor settled. Varkhul collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. His body trembled, slick with sweat and blood, but his eyes were clear. The gods had tested him. He had not knelt. No servant. No pawn. No mindless husk, twisted into demon flesh for the amusement of greater powers. He would carve his own dominion, by blade, by flame, by will. When he rose again, he did not stumble. The forest bowed before him, and the blade in his grip was silent. Varkhul the Blackened walked on, not as a follower of chaos, but as its conqueror. Chapter 9. The Hidden Shrine. The trees parted like curtains, revealing a wound in the land. Varkhul stepped into the clearing, boots crunching over bones long bleached by time and weather. The shrine stood before him, a jagged monolith of obsidian veined with veins of pulsing crimson light, slick with blood offerings and ash. Around it, crude totems of flesh and wood formed a desecrated perimeter. Skulls mounted on pikes, entrails hung like banners, fetishes carved from bone and sinew dangling from branches. The air stank of filth and rot. It was sacred. This was no shrine of priests or warlocks. This was older, primal, built not by man but by beasts, children of chaos that had never known civilization. And they were here. The braying sounded before the ambush, snorts, guttural snarls, hooves stomping the earth. Varkhul turned slowly, his hand resting on Akrakar, just as the first of the beastmen lunged from the brush. A Gore with a rusted cleaver and matted fur leapt at him, fangs bared. Varkhul ducked beneath the swing and drove his elbow into the beast's snout, shattering bone. It collapsed with a strangled squeal. More followed, a pack. 6, 7, 10. They encircled him, their forms a grotesque mix of horned heads, hunched backs, and hooved legs. Their eyes glowed with fervor, but not recognition. To them, he was just meat. The largest of them pushed forward, massive, horned, his body covered in crude armor made of scavenged shields and human skin. The chieftain. He towered over the others, brandishing a massive axe carved from a fallen Empire knight's sword. The beast roared, lifting his axe, and charged. Varkhul met him head-on. Their weapons clashed in a shriek of metal and bone. The chieftain's strength was immense, each blow hammering down like a battering ram. But Varkhul was fury forged in steel. He twisted, slammed the flat of his blade into the beast's knee, and followed with an upward cleave that carved through armor and hide. Blood sprayed in gouts, steaming in the cold air. The beast roared in rage, swung wide, and struck Varkhul's chest. The Chaos Knight staggered back, armor dented, ribs cracking beneath the blow. But pain had no hold on him now. He grinned behind his shattered helm. The chieftain lunged again. Varkhul sidestepped, spun, and drove Akrakar into the beast's spine, just below the neck. The blade pierced deep, pulsing with red light as it fed. The chieftain froze, mouth agape, eyes wide. Then Varkhul wrenched the blade free in a brutal arc that cleaved half the creature's skull. The body collapsed in a wet heap. Silence fell. The other beastmen watched, breathing heavy, blood and sweat steaming from their bodies. Then one knelt. Another followed. Within moments, all had dropped to their knees, heads bowed. They had seen something in him, not just power, but purpose, chaos made manifest. Their old leader had been brute strength. This was divine rage in steel. Varkhul raised his sword. "Rise," he growled. "There is blood yet to be spilled." 2 nights later, the Empire garrison at Thalbruk awoke to madness. It began with fire. Pitch pots hurled over the wooden palisades, setting the towers alight. The gatehouse was smashed open moments later by a charging brace of beastmen wielding a felled tree like a battering ram. Varkhul led them through the breach. He was death incarnate. The first guardsman he encountered had his head removed with a single swing. Another was impaled and thrown into a brazier. Screams rose as beastmen swarmed through the barracks, dragging soldiers from their beds, hacking and butchering in a frenzy. The captain rallied a defense at the armory. Varkhul tore through it like parchment. Steel met steel as the defenders tried to push him back. He split one down the middle, spine to groin. Another had his legs taken off at the knee, his blood spraying in arcs across the frozen ground. A third, wounded and crawling, tried to plead for his life. Varkhul crushed his skull underfoot without slowing. The carnage was absolute. By dawn, the garrison was nothing but embers and corpses. The Empire's banners burned, and above the blackened gates, the beastmen hung the heads of their victims in a grisly display. Varkhul stood at the shrine once more, overlooking the blood-soaked valley. The beastmen chanted now, not in brays and roars, but in a crude imitation of his name, repeated over and over, like a war hymn. He let them. For now, they were useful. But he was no warlord of beasts, no tribal god to be worshipped. He was the storm, and this was just the beginning. Chapter 10. Gerwins Wrath. The sky was black with storm clouds when Gerwin folk came. Varkhul's camp nestled in the ravine below the ruined shrine, surrounded by jagged rock faces and tangled underbrush. Fires crackled in pits dug with crude claws. Beastmen feasted on the remains of Empire soldiers, drunk on blood and victory. The night was thick with the stink of filth, roasting flesh, and bestial joy. Varkhul stood atop the ridge, watching it all, with arms folded, black armor gleaming in the firelight. He said nothing. He rarely needed to. The horde understood him through violence, not words. That silence was broken by thunder, not from the sky, but from black powder. The first explosion took half the ravine wall with it, sending a fireball into the sky. Beastmen were launched like ragdolls, limbs torn from their sockets mid-flight. The second came a heartbeat later, under the shrine itself. A magical detonation cracked the monolith in half, sending molten shards raining down like meteors. Then the screaming began. From the trees came men in black, not soldiers, hunters, witch hunters. At their head strode Gerwin Falk, his coat soaked from rain, his sword drawn, pistols holstered at his hips like the fangs of a predator. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, but the fury within them burned like holy fire. "Kill them all," he roared. They obeyed. Firelocks thundered. Silver shot blasted through muscle and bone, bursting beastmen apart in sprays of gore. Crossbows sang with bolts engraved in prayers to Sigmar, their tips blessed in shrines before the assault. One struck a Gore through the eye, pinning him to a tree before he finished screaming. Varkhul roared, leaping from the ridge like a descending god of ruin. He landed in the center of the bloodbath, Akrakar already in motion. A hunter screamed as the blade tore through his shoulder and chest, splitting him in two. Another swung an axe. Varkhul blocked it with his pauldron, then drove his fist through the man's gut, ripping free a steaming loop of intestine. But this wasn't a war. It was an execution. Falk was already upon him. Their blades met with a ring that cracked the night in half. Steel scraped against chaos-forged iron, sparks cascading like falling stars. Falk struck with relentless precision, each blow calculated, each step measured. "You die here, heretic," he spat, "your soul forfeit, your name erased." Varkhul answered with violence. He slammed his sword down in a brutal arc. Falk parried, pivoted, and drove his shoulder into Varkhul's chest, knocking the Chaos Knight off balance. Then came the blade, clean, fast, cutting across Varkhul's side, splitting mail and flesh alike. Blood sprayed, black, hissing. Varkhul roared, swinging wide. Falk ducked under the arc and fired point blank. The pistol shot struck Varkhul's thigh, the blessed silver bursting through the back of his leg. He dropped to one knee. The beastmen were already dead. Those not butchered in the first volley were hunted down and slain, their howls silenced beneath blades and bullets. Varkhul rose with effort, every movement burning. He lunged, clumsier now, fury overtaking precision. Falk stepped aside, drove his sword deep into Varkhul's side, and twisted. The Chaos Knight collapsed to his hands, blood pooling beneath him. Falk stood over him. "Look at you," he hissed, "a blight upon the world, alone, broken. Is this what your gods promised?" Varkhul laughed, even through the blood, even through the pain. A low, ragged laugh. "You think this ends with you?" Falk raised his sword, and then Varkhul hurled a dagger from his belt. It struck one of the powder casks beside a fallen campfire. Flame licked the wood. A heartbeat later, the ground exploded in a column of smoke and flame, throwing men in all directions. In the chaos, Varkhul staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding side, and fled into the forest. Falk gave chase, but the shadows swallowed the Chaos Knight whole. By morning, the ravine was a ruin. The shrine reduced to rubble, the beastmen dead. Only Varkhul's blood trail remained, fading with each step northward. Falk stood over the ruins, blade sheathed, expression grim. "He'll run," his lieutenant said. Falk shook his head. "No, he'll crawl, and when he finds breath again, he'll come back." In the depths of the forest, Varkhul collapsed beneath a tree, his body broken, his armor dented and torn. He had been defeated, not slain, but beaten. His warband gone, his pride shattered, but not his will. His fingers dug into the earth, blood mixing with mud. For the name burned in his throat like acid. This is not over. The forest trembled around him, and in the dark something old stirred. Chapter 11. City of Masks. The city gates loomed ahead like the maw of a complacent beast, drunk on gold and blind to its own rot. Altof's sister city, Vurtbad, capital of the Sturlan province, was a bastion of supposed civility. Cobbled streets gleamed with lantern light, lined with towering manors, marble fountains, and wine-slicked promenades, where powdered nobles preened like exotic birds. But beneath the perfume and powdered wigs, Varkhul smelled it, the reek of hypocrisy, of hidden sin, of something festering just below the flesh. He had limped into the city, wrapped in illusion. The sorcerer he'd gutted near Middenheim had possessed more than just knowledge. He'd carried a cloak stitched from demon hide, enchanted to conceal its wearer beneath layers of glamour. Varkhul wore it now, and where once stood a hulking black knight cloaked in gore, there now walked a pale, elegant mercenary in red leather and a golden mask, one of 1,000 masked mercenaries in the city that week for the grand masquerade of Wurtbad. He passed through the gate with ease. No one noticed the limping gait, the blood beneath his fingernails, the lingering stench of death. Not in Wurtbad, not during festival season. The masquerade began at the ducal palace. Fireworks cracked above like the screams of distant war, but the revelers below only laughed, clinking crystal goblets of amasec and dancing to the shrill tune of violins. Masks of all shapes and styles adorned every face. Porcelain angels, gilded beasts, grim jesters with eyes like slits, and none of them saw the monster among them. Varkhul moved like shadow between them. The cloak cloaked not only his form, but his aura. Even those with witch sight saw only a handsome stranger, perhaps a mercenary of Thailand birth. His voice, when needed, was quiet, charming. But he watched. He listened, and in the undercurrent of this gilded parade, he found what he sought. They called themselves the Circle of the Second Dawn. They whispered their prayers, not to Sigmar, but to the Changer of Ways. Beneath the palatial facade, they plotted madness, chaos, and truth, wrapped in beautiful lies. They passed pamphlets etched in invisible ink, carved runes beneath banquet tables, danced with poison blades hidden in the hems of silken sleeves. And when they saw Varkhul's eyes, truly saw them through the mask, they bowed. Not in worship, but recognition. They believed him a prophet, a chosen of their god, a harbinger of revelation. He didn't disabuse them of the notion. They took him to the lower sanctum beneath the chapel of Verena, through a hidden door carved into the eye of a marble statue. There, beneath the city, the truth pulsed. Dozens knelt in a circle, robes of silk and flesh, bodies tattooed with shifting runes that danced when the candlelight struck them just so. A central altar bore a book bound in something that still breathed faintly, inked in human bile and powdered bone. Varkhul stood at its center, cloaked and towering. "Your city is ripe," he said. "Your lords fat with lies, your gods deaf with pride." They listened, rapt. "You want the world to change," he hissed, "then let it bleed." He gave them the plan, not as command, but suggestion, the idea, the seed of fire. Poison in the wine of the Arch-Lector. Demonic glyphs scribed behind the paintings in the governor's hall. Plague rats loosed in the orphanage. Runes etched into the foundations of the ducal palace, just shallow enough to be missed, until they weren't. He did not raise a sword. He did not roar a challenge. He whispered, and the city began to die. The first death came the next evening, a noblewoman who clawed her own throat out on the ballroom floor, shrieking that her mask was eating her face. The next, a magistrate who turned to ash mid-sentence in the council chambers. A priest found drowned in holy water, lungs filled with rot. Panic rippled through the city like cracks in ice. By the fourth night, the ducal palace was aflame. Riots bloomed in the alleys. The guard fought blindly, unsure who the enemy even was. In the center of it all, Varkhul stood atop the corpse of the Arch-Lector, blood pooling beneath his boots, mask split in half. Not as a knight, not as a monster. As a reminder that chaos didn't need armies to conquer. Sometimes it only needed an invitation. Chapter 12. The Bridge of Blades. The bridge groaned beneath their boots. A narrow span of stone and rusted chain stretched over a ravine that split the world in two. A jagged wound in the earth, hundreds of feet deep, choked with mist and swirling winds that screamed like damned souls. The stone path was barely 10 feet across, slick with moss and old blood. On either side, rusted pikes jutted from the parapets like broken teeth, many still bearing the skeletal remains of heretics long forgotten. Varkhul stood at one end, blackened armor scarred and caked in the gore of a dozen battles. Akrakar rested at his side, humming softly, its runes pulsing with a quiet hunger. His breath steamed through the crack in his helm, and the wind tugged at the ragged remnants of his cloak. Across the span, Gerwins Falk waited. The witch-hunter's coat flared behind him, tattered and soaked in the blood of chaos. His hat was gone, revealing silver-streaked hair bound in a tight braid. His armor was battered, black with soot and pitted from countless duels. But his eyes, those eyes still burned with that same righteous fury, the fire of a man who had abandoned everything for a cause he no longer questioned. In his right hand he held a longsword, its blade pure silver, etched with holy scripture, faintly glowing against the storm-smeared sky. His left hand rested on the hilt of a flintlock, the barrel engraved with runes that made Varkul's skin itch. The wind howled between them. Neither spoke. Then Falk stepped forward. "I've followed your trail for weeks, Varkhul. Through ash and ruin, through the corpses of children and the prayers of madmen." Varkhul said nothing. Falk's face twisted. "I know what you are. I know what's behind the mask. But what you don't know, what none of you beasts ever bother to learn, is who I was." He drew closer. Slow, deliberate. 20 years ago, I knelt before a shrine just like the one you were born in. I slit a man's throat for Tzeentch. I offered the flesh of my father to Slaanesh. I carved the skull of a child for Khorne. The wind paused. Even the ravine held its breath. "I was you," Falk said. Then he raised his sword. "But I clawed my way back. I chose redemption. And now I'll bury every mistake I ever made, starting with you." Varkhul stepped onto the bridge. Their blades met with a crash like thunder. Steel rang, sparks flew. They fought on the knife's edge of oblivion, each blow risking a fall into the abyss below. Falk was fast, unnaturally fast. Every strike of his silver blade sent searing agony through Varkul's flesh, bypassing armor, biting into nerve and bone. Blessed steel burned like fire where it cut, leaving blackened flesh behind. Varkhul countered with brute force. Akrakar cleaved and slammed, carving chunks of stone from the bridge as it missed. He feinted high, then drove the hilt into Falk's ribs. The witch-hunter staggered, then fired his flintlock point-blank into Varkul's side. The shot struck beneath the pauldron. Varkhul roared, blood spraying from his mouth, but didn't fall. Instead, he slammed his head into Falk's face, breaking the man's nose in a spray of crimson. They grappled, boots slipping on the blood-slick stone. Falk drove his blade into Varkul's shoulder. Varkhul grabbed Falk's wrist and snapped it. The bone broke clean. The sword clattered across the stone. Falk screamed, drew a dagger with his good hand and rammed it into Varkul's throat joint. Blood gurgled. Varkhul dropped to one knee. Falk stood over him, panting, face a ruin of blood and sweat. "It's over." Then Varkhul laughed. It was a raw, broken sound. "You never left the gods," he rasped. "You just swapped masters." He surged upward. His gauntlet seized Falk by the throat and lifted him from the ground. The witch-hunter kicked and thrashed, spitting curses and blood, pistol firing wildly into the air. Varkhul turned, stepped toward the edge, and drove Akrakar into Falk's gut. The blade burst from his back in a spray of blood and bile. Falk gasped, eyes wide. "Your redemption dies with you," Varkhul growled. Then he ripped the blade sideways, severing the witch hunter from hip to shoulder in a single gory arc. Falk collapsed onto the bridge in two twitching halves. The silver blade clattered nearby, glowing softly. Varkhul dropped to one knee beside it, blood pouring from his wounds. He reached out and took the sword. Its holy runes burned his skin, but they didn't reject him. Not entirely. He stood, now holding two blades, one forged in shadow, the other in light. He turned from the bridge, limping, leaving Falk's bisected corpse to the carrion winds. The gods, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Chapter 13. The Screaming Pass. The wind screamed as it tore through the mountain cleft, a constant wail like the howling of 1,000 tormented souls. They called it the Screaming Pass, a sliver of madness carved through the World's Edge Mountains, forgotten by most, feared by all. Legends claimed it was once a road carved by dwarfs, abandoned when the stone itself began to weep blood and whisper curses. Now it served only one purpose: to test the damned. Varkhul trudged into its maw at dusk. His armor was pitted and scarred, stained with the blood of men, beasts, and gods. A krakar hung heavy at his side. The purifying blade he had taken from Gerwin Falk now rested across his back, wrapped in cloth to dull its burning presence. Every step through the frozen gravel drove pain up his leg, where silver shot festered deep beneath skin. His breath steamed in ragged plumes. His eyes, once keen, were bloodshot, ringed with black. The walls of the pass loomed high on either side, twisted and unnatural. Faces seemed to shift in the stone. Eyes blinked where no eyes should be. The very air throbbed with dark magic, thick, cloying, suffocating. He walked on. Then the whispers began. "You failed them." Varkhul paused. The voice was familiar. Kaeldric, his second in command. He turned and saw the warrior standing in the snow, chest split open, eyes black with rot. His lips twisted in a sneer. "You led us to ruin. You wore the crown before you earned it." Varkhul growled and walked faster. The image faded. Then another voice, softer. Ol saw the pale. She stepped from the shadows, her body still aflame, eyes burning coals in a ruined face. "You let them burn me. You watched." "No," he whispered. "No more." The wind answered with laughter, wet and layered with a dozen voices. The pass had opened its maw. From the snow rose beasts. Not flesh, not spirit, something in between. Chaos hounds, with faces half-formed, twisted into permanent howls. Eyeless serpents slithered across the stone, their scales peeling to reveal mouths within mouths. Above, a winged horror screamed and dove, its form a tangle of limbs, blades, and tongues. Varkhul met them all with steel. Akrakar howled as it struck, cleaving a serpent in half, its blood boiling on contact. He drove his boot into the skull of a hound, shattering bone, then spun, and drove the silver blade through the chest of the winged demon as it descended. It burst in a cloud of ash and glass shards. But they kept coming. The ground cracked. Out crawled a figure made of molten bronze and hate, his old chieftain, Skor, reborn in daemon form. Its eyes were voids, its mouth a furnace. It struck with a hammer that sang with the screams of the enslaved. Varkhul was thrown against the cliff wall. His ribs snapped, blood gushed from his mouth. Still he rose. He roared defiance, tearing the cloth from the silver blade. Flames erupted as it met the air. He swung it with both hands, carving a burning arc across the beast's chest. The demon howled. He followed with Akrakar, stabbing it deep into Skor's eye, driving forward even as fire consumed his arm. The thing collapsed, steaming and silent, and the pass grew quiet. But the worst had yet to come. The wind slowed, the stones pulsed, and from the darkness ahead stepped himself. Perfect mirror, armor polished, unmarred. Eyes golden, not red, a crown of black iron atop his helm. Varkhul stared. The doppelganger smiled. This is what you could be. Not a scavenger, not a failed knight, a king. Kneel. No. Varkhul rasped. You'll never be more than their tool. Serve one god or another. I served myself. The mirror Varkhul lunged. The battle was silent and savage, blade against blade, strike for strike. Every move mirrored, every blow countered. Sparks flew, armor dented, blood spilled. At last, Varkhul dropped a crocker and seized the silver sword. With a scream, he drove it through the heart of his mirror, light exploding from the wound, burning the false king from the inside out. The body shrieked and dissolved into dust. Silence fell. The wind ceased. The pass released him. When Varkhul staggered from the far end of the ravine, the sun was rising. He was hunched, shaking, blood-soaked, one eye swollen shut, his gauntlets fused to his hands by dried gore. His mind throbbed with the echoes of madness. He was not whole, but he was more than man, more than chaos. He was Varkhul the Blackened, broken and remade. And ahead, the wastes beckoned. Chapter 14. Home in Ruin. The wind in the chaos wastes was not wind as men knew it. It didn't howl or scream. It whispered promises, memories, lies. It carried the scent of burning flesh, the taste of iron, and the sound of dying gods. It tugged at the soul like claws through silk. Varkhul crested the final ridge. His knees buckled. Below him, where once the banners of the iron howl had risen like jagged teeth against the warped horizon, there was only fire. The encampment was a shattered sprawl of ruined tents, charred altars, and broken iron. Spikes that once bore the skulls of conquered lords now held only ash. The shrines he had built with his own blood and blade were toppled, smashed under hoof and hammer. Black smoke coiled upward like fingers reaching for a dead god. He stumbled down the slope, every step sinking into cursed mud thick with blood. Bones crunched beneath his boots. Charred limbs jutted from piles of soot, some still bearing the sigils of his warriors, etched into warped skin, now peeling and blistered. He passed a corpse nailed to a monolith. Kaldric's remains, crucified with his own blade through the mouth, ribs split open like a book. His entrails spelled a message, crudely carved and still steaming. Unworthy. Varkhul fell to his knees. His hand gripped the mud. His breath hitched. The howl that left his throat was not human. It was a primal, bestial thing, a cry of loss, of rage, of something sacred, violated. His fingers dug into the earth, breaking nails, blood mixing with the soil. He rose. Inside the ruined war tent, he found them all. The body of Ulsa the Pale was nailed to the inner poles, her skin flayed and turned into parchment, demonic runes carved into the raw meat beneath. Brugg and Faun, the twin berserkers, had been sewn together, face to face, mouth to mouth, eyes wide with terror frozen into lifeless stares. At the center of the carnage stood a single standard, a new one, red and black, bearing a crude sigil not of any god, but of a man, a hand holding a severed, bleeding heart, the emblem of Lord Dargal the Heart Thief, a rising power in the northern wastes, a butcher of his own kin, known for carving out the hearts of defeated champions and feeding them to his pet spawn. Varkhul stared at the banner. His breath slowed. He took Akrakar in one hand, the purifying blade of Falk in the other. He stood between the bones of his dreams and the ash of his ambitions. This wasn't defeat. This was a challenge. His warband was gone. But their blood was not shed in vain. Not if it fed the fire now rising in his gut. The wastes did not honor mourning. They honored vengeance, wrath, ascendancy through ruin. He screamed his fury into the endless sky, and the winds answered with laughter. He would not weep. He would rebuild. And then he would tear out Dargo's heart and hang it from the horns of his war mount. The gods would see him, and they would fear what they had forged. Chapter 15. The Black King Rises. The wasteland howled as two titans approached. The sky above the blasted plains churned in unnatural shades of red and black, clouds swirling like the eye of a storm that hung motionless above the blood-soaked arena. The ground beneath was cracked obsidian and bone, steaming with the heat of corrupted magic. Thunder rumbled not from the heavens, but from the earth, where demonic forces watched in silence from the shadows of warped trees and piles of shattered skulls. On one side stood Lord Dargul the Heart Thief, a monster in crimson iron, his armor adorned with the hearts of champions impaled on rusted hooks. His helm was crowned with a rack of broken horns, his eyes burning blue through slits that bled mist. He held a great cleaver of black bone, thrumming with warp energy, its edge chipped and blackened from 1,000 executions. His retinue encircled him, beast spawn, daemonettes, sorcerers of Nurgle, and traitor champions from 12 sundered warbands. They howled and banged their weapons together, calling for blood. Opposite him stood Varkhul, once broken, now reborn. His armor had been reforged in shadow and spite, patched with scavenged steel, bone, and skin, blackened further with charred ichor. His helm had no crown, only a barbed crest forged from the weapons of his dead. At his hip, the twin blades hung, a Krakar still hungry for torment, and the silver blade of Falk, bound with rune-writhing cloth, its purity seething. He said nothing. Dargo laughed, voice like stone dragged across bone. You come alone, no warband, no gods to shield you, no beasts to bleed for your pride. Varkhul drew both blades. I only need your death. The crowd surged forward, roaring for carnage. And then they clashed. The ground cracked beneath their fury. Dargul's cleaver met Akrakar in a shockwave that shattered nearby bone pylons. The impact sent a ripple through the onlookers, forcing even demons to stagger. Varkhul ducked under a horizontal sweep, stabbed upward with the silver blade, only to have Dargul block it with his forearm, breaking the cloth bindings and sending sparks flying. Blood sprayed, but Varkhul didn't fall. He pivoted, drove his elbow into Dargul's throat, then slashed a ragged arc across the Chaos Lord's chest. Armor split, a heart burst, one of many. Dargul howled in rage, swung wide, and caught Varkhul across the back, slicing into the bone. Flesh split, a vertebra cracked. Varkhul collapsed to one knee, but caught himself. I remember your cowardice, Dargul snarled. You ran from Falk like a cur. You led your warband to slaughter. Varkhul rose slowly, eyes glowing red behind the helm. I didn't run. He hurled the silver sword into Dargul's shoulder. The blessed blade pierced through the cursed armor, sizzling where it touched, demon-wrought flesh. Dargul screamed as black fire burst from the wound. Varkhul closed the distance Akrakar raised. He brought the blade down in a two-handed arc that split Dargul from collar to hip, cleaving through steel, flesh, and bone. Blood erupted in a geyser, soaking the arena. The Chaos Lord dropped to his knees, the light in his eyes dimming. You are nothing, Dargul wheezed. Varkhul leaned close. But in the vengeance, Then he tore Akraka free with a savage twist. Dargul fell backward, dead. The field was silent. All eyes turned to Varkhul, the broken knight who had walked through the empire, crossed the screaming pass, faced down witch hunters and demons, and returned to the wastes not as a servant, but as a conqueror. He raised his sword high, dripping with the blood of a would-be god. "I am the Black King," he roared, voice shaking the heavens. "Kneel or be slain." The first to kneel was a mutated brute with 9 arms, then a sorcerer of Tzeentch, eyes wide with reverence, then a beastman shaman, then a demonette, then dozens more. They knelt, and in the heart of the wastes, beneath a sky that bled madness, a new warband was born, baptized not in prophecy, but in ruin, forged in exile, tempered by vengeance, led by a man who bowed to no god. The Black King had risen, and the world would bleed for it.